Okay, guys. Let's just get this done. This has been a journey, but one that I need to see completed.
With a Russian army led by Butyrlin, eagerly seeking to achieve a second Kunersdorf and vanquish their foes. With the next campaign on the horizon, the Austrians planned to keep 60,000 troops stationed in Saxony under the ever-vigilant Dawn. Simultaneously, they aimed to reinforce Lauden's ranks in Silesia with no fewer than 72,000 soldiers, all prepared to launch a grand and unrelenting offensive alongside the mighty Russian army. Frederick foresaw that Silesia would become the most active theatre of operations and concentrated his best and most complete regiments, totaling around 55,000 soldiers in that region. Meanwhile, Henry took command of the 28,000 poorish troops left in Saxony, while 14,000 men were posted in Pomerania, defending the vital port of Kolberg against the Russians. Under General Pyotr Rumyantsev, these laid siege to the stronghold in August. Despite Frederick's best efforts to keep his two formidable enemies at bay, his plans ultimately failed. He even missed a golden opportunity to attack the Russians at Liegnitz on the 15th of August, a move that in hindsight proved wise. As fate would have it, the combined Allied force numbered a staggering 130,000 soldiers. Amidst this sea of enemies, Frederick meticulously constructed a secure refuge for his relatively small army of 55,000 men. After Butyrlin's arrival and his successful link-up with Lauden 4 days later, the newly joined commanders showed a great reluctance to launch an attack. Although Frederick had predicted that Lauden would force the issue, it was not to be. He confided in Prince Henry that, "The Russians still have no desire to attack, but I think Lauden will force them to." Indeed, the Austrian commander made several attempts to break through the Prussian defenses, but Frederick was ready. He ordered his army to retreat to a fortified camp at Bunzelwitz, strategically located to the northwest of Schweidnitz. Prussian soldiers worked tirelessly for 12 hours a day, around the clock, to construct an impenetrable network of trenches and palisades. The Saxon Captain Thielke was so impressed by their efforts that he reported admiringly. In this location, the Prussian army stood on a series of low and mostly gentle eminences, which were utilized in a masterly fashion. The approaches were by no means physically insurmountable, but what rendered them difficult to reach were the little streams, the swampy meadows, and the enfilading and grazing fire from the batteries on every side. The triumphant campaign thus far had cost the Prussian army a mere 8 casualties, 2 hussars and 6 free battalion men. With his focus still firmly on Upper Silesia, Frederick moved his army on August 5th to the central position of Strehlen, within a single march of the Upper Oder, and equally distant from his fortresses at Breslau, Neisse, and Schweidnitz. Breaking into Schweidnitz would have been a costly endeavor, with its 460 pieces of artillery guarding the fortress. The Russians, it seemed, had blinked first. Butyrlin initially told Lauden he would cooperate in a joint attack, but his confidence wavered, causing him to have second thoughts. It wasn't until September 9th that he finally gave up, retreating his army back east to the river Oder and beyond. In an effort to encourage him to leave, Frederick dispatched General Dubislav Friedrich von Platen with a corps of 8,000 troops to raid the Russian base areas in western Poland. Butyrlin's departure left Lauden with a formidable force of 80,000 regulars positioned on the hill slopes at the southern edge of the Silesian plain. Although Frederick held a low opinion of Lauden's abilities, he deemed it safe to leave the Austrians in their camp and move closer to Neisse, where provisions were abundant. At this point, the uneventful campaign should have come to a close, with both sides settling into winter quarters. Frederick, in fact, believed it was over. In a letter to Prince Henry on September 27th, he asserted that it was next to impossible for the Austrians in Saxony to attempt another raid on Berlin, now that the Russians had departed. As for the Austrians in Silesia, He was confident there was nothing to worry about. But Frederick was wrong. In the north, the Prussians faced a particularly aggressive Russian problem. In mid-September 1761, the relentless Russians descended upon Pomerania, laying siege to any stronghold used as a communication line between Stettin and the besieged Kolberg. General Platen was constantly harassed by separate Russian contingents roaming the region. In response, a Prussian corps, led by Major General Stotterheim, received the call to depart from western Pomerania and secure a strategic vantage point at Stettin. With unwavering loyalty to the crown, Stotterheim rallied his troops and embarked on a perilous march towards the coveted position, leaving behind only Hussar General Wilhelm Sebastian von Belling and his loyal corps to fend off the impending Swedish invasion. The Swedes had amassed a modest army of 13,791, including 3,098 cavalrymen and 1,152 infantry soldiers. The departure of Stutterheim presented a golden opportunity for the Swedish field marshal, the esteemed Count Augustin Ehrensvärd, to seize the initiative and strike a decisive blow against Belling's outnumbered forces. The Swedish army united under the leadership of two commanders, Liebecker and Sprenck-Porten. It advanced towards Belling's corps in a pincer movement. On September 17th, Belling launched a daring assault on Liebecker's column, engaging them in a fierce combat at Kosabroma. His bold attack nearly succeeded, but he was ultimately forced to retreat. Undeterred by this setback, Belling withdrew towards Rothermühl, where he was to be joined by two grenadier battalions sent as reinforcements from Stettin. A force under Baron von der Goltz was meant to delay Liebecker. Meanwhile, on the same day, Sprenck-Porten's vanguard relentlessly pursued Major Nobelsdorf's detachment, consisting of 200 infantry and 50 hussars, who had been defending a stronghold close by and were now on their way to link up with Belling. Sprenck-Porten sent a battalion.
It's cool to see the Swedish, because so far the Swedish, while they've been mentioned obviously as a part of the anti-Prussian camp, haven't really done much. They've kind of just been an afterthought in this video series. So it's kind of cool to now see them actually, like, you know, be more active, I suppose. So yeah.
Skaraborg infantry towards Rothermühl, as it became clear the Prussians would converge here. On the 18th of September, Belling, leading his vanguard, arrived at Neuensund, opposite of the Skaraborg's infantry battalion that held Rothermühl, just 6 kilometers to the east. With the 3 companies, Freie Infanterie von Hort, Hullesen and Kennewitz, and 100 hussars by his side, Belling knew that the time for action was at hand. Though the Swedish positions were unyielding, Belling's vanguard unleashed a deafening cannonade upon their enemy, causing mayhem without attempting to launch an all-out assault. Belling waited with bated breath for the arrival of his remaining infantry, 5 companies, and 2 grenadier battalions from Passwalk. The 2 battalions, however, were delayed, and Belling's senses were suddenly awoken by the sounds of a fierce engagement at his rear. Liebecker's column had engaged the detachment left behind to delay his advance. The 2 companies and 2 squadrons were under attack, making it all the more crucial for Belling to act quickly. Belling had to defeat Sprenck-Porten in order to have any hope of victory. Liebecker, sensing that he was outnumbered, limited his action to musketry fire, hoping for Sprenck-Porten's arrival. As the sun reached its highest point at 11 a.m., the 2 grenadier battalions arrived at Neuensund. Without a moment's hesitation, Belling commanded them to launch a flanking movement against the forest. At the same moment, Sprenck-Porten's main corps appeared on the road from Wilhelmsburg, ready to launch a fierce counterattack. The Swedish grenadiers stood resolute in the center, Frikompani Lille and Sprenck-Porten on the right wing, and Frikompani Lundberg and Ehrenhielm on the left wing. The cavalry and the rest of the infantry stood ready in reserve, awaiting the battle cry. As the 2 armies drew nearer, the tension was palpable. The Prussian forces were arranged in a formation, with Grenadier Battalion Ingersleben leading the charge, flanked by Grenadier Battalion Rothkirch, Free Infantry Hort, and the Belling Hussars. As the lines collided, the sound of swords clashing and muskets firing filled the air. Grenadier Battalion Ingersleben charged towards Frikompanie Lille, breaking through and pushing forward with great force, leaving the rest of the Prussian forces behind. Ingersleben pressed forward so quickly.
Oh man, yeah. He's about to get, like, attacked from the rear because he pushed too far out.
That they soon found themselves isolated and in danger. Sprengporten's younger brother, Goran Magnus, cunningly outflanked them, trapping them in a small wood where they were attacked on every side by the Swedish infantry, including the fierce 1st Swedish Grenadiers, Frikompanie Lundberg and Frikompanie Silfverströms. Despite their bravery, Grenadier Battalion Ingersleben was forced to retreat, losing 2/3 of their men. The Prussians were forced to withdraw, fearful of being caught between the two Swedish columns. They retreated to Taschenberg and Geren, sending the 2 Grenadier battalions back to Paswalk. As the sun set, they marched westwards and then southwards towards Strasbourg. The Swedish columns of Liebecker and Sprengporten united at Schönhausen and marched back to Waldeck and Strasbourg. The battle was not without loss, with the Prussians losing around 350, including 11 NCOs and 287 men from Grenadier Battalion Ingersleben. Grenadier Battalion Rothkirch, too, shed blood for their cause, losing 2 of their own and 1 officer, as well as 3 privates wounded. The Swedes, in turn, also felt the sting of battle, losing 1 of their own officers, with 37 of their men paying the ultimate price. 5 officers and 76 men fought bravely through their wounds, while 9 remained missing, and 26 were taken as prisoners of war. Despite the intense struggle, the outcome of the battle had little influence on the greater war effort.
Ouch. Good. To be fair, Frederick, hasn't been dealing with them much, so it's like, oh yeah, I'm at war with them too, huh?
The combat at Neuensund was but a mere footnote in an already slow campaign. Nevertheless, for Frederick, 3 more incidents would come to pass that year, 1 welcome, while the other 2 were decidedly not. The first of these was a brilliant piece of work by General von Platen and his corps of about 8,000. On the 15th of September, they fearlessly attacked the main Russian supply base at Gostin in Poland, causing great destruction by destroying 5,000 wagons and taking 1,845 prisoners and 7 artillery pieces. Unbowed, they moved on towards the Prussian fortress of Kolberg on the Pomeranian coast, continuing to disrupt the Russian supply lines as they went. Yet, the exultation of the victory at Gostin was short-lived, for news of a tragic calamity followed closely on its heels. On the 1st of October, the dreaded Laudon launched a sudden night attack and captured the impregnable fortress of Schweidnitz, leaving Frederick stunned and bewildered. The significance of this loss was not lost on him, for Schweidnitz controlled the passes from Bohemia via Friedland and was the key to Lower Silesia. To make matters worse, the fortress of Glatz, which covered the routes from Königgrätz to Neisse, had already fallen into Austrian hands. As the year drew to a close, a series of ill-fated news had cast a shadow of gloom over the land. The mighty fortress of Kolberg, a bastion of defense against the enemy forces, had fallen to the Russian invaders on December 16th. With this critical stronghold now under their control, the Russians had gained a vital port that would allow them to transport their supplies and troops with ease. It was a dark moment for the defenders of the realm. For the first time in ages, the Russians could bask in the warmth of Pomerania, and the Austrians could bide their time in Silesia.
Oh my god. just when things kind of go well for Frederick, like 10 things worse happen. Oh man. It just makes the Russians, have a better supply line and be able to move directly into, like, your home turf now, not having to just march. That sucks.
Safe from the biting cold of winter. Meanwhile, in the heart of Saxony, Prince Henry's camp at Meissen had been overrun by the relentless forces of Dawn, forcing him to retreat in disarray. The only flicker of hope in the midst of this
Not
dreary
even
winter
Henry.
was the sight of the French forces, who had retired to their quarters in November after an extended and arduous campaign. The French had hoped for more significant gains that year, but alas, they were left empty-handed, their efforts dashed against the unyielding defences of the enemy. The year 1761 was a sombre one, with no major battles fought on the main Eastern Front, save for the clash of arms that erupted on the 16th of July near the river Lieper in Wellinghausen. Here, Prince Ferdinand and his forces emerged victorious, dealing a decisive blow to the enemy. Though the campaign persisted, this triumph ensured that the enemy would not taste the sweet fruit of victory in Hanover that year. Despite the apparent lull in the fighting, there was a sense of weariness that hung over the Allied forces, as they found themselves trapped in a repetitive cycle of strategy. As the days grew shorter and the winter chill crept in, Frederick and his army sought refuge in the royal Schloss at Breslau, where the mood was as dark and gloomy as the war itself. Frederick was plagued by headaches and despondency, and the palace itself lay in ruin, testament to the devastation wrought by Louden's bombardment in the previous year. Never before had the Prussian army been forced to retreat so far into Silesia, and the Austrians seized the opportunity to establish their troops in cantonments on the Prussian side of the border, marking a turning point in the war. The tides of fortune were shifting, and there was no reason to assume next year would bring any more positive news. The Messalina of the North is dead.
Yeah, I don't blame him for not caring about Elizabeth's death. But yeah, this is where it happens. Kind of like what we're seeing with... Obviously, we've known this entire time that Frederick is gonna win, and the British win the 7 Years' War. And, yeah, and a big turning point is Russia pulling out because Tsar Peter is about to take power and essentially pull Russia out of the war, which is a big aid to Frederick.
As the new year of 1762 dawned upon Prussia, her army lay in tatters, and her once mighty king appeared no more than a madman's mockery, a pitiable figure of despair. On the 6th day of the month, Frederick, weighed down by depression, dispatched a missive from Breslau to his chief minister Finkenstein, imploring that the Turks be persuaded to engage the Austrians in the Balkans. Else, all hope was lost and Frederick's fate sealed. So dire was his plight that he hinted at ending his own life. 2 weeks elapsed, when on the 19th, a message reached him from his informant in Warsaw, bringing news that the Tsarina Elizabeth had at last breathed her last breath. Frederick's reaction was tempered with caution. He wrote to Finkenstein, advising that the succession of Peter III to the Russian throne left much in doubt, for it was unclear if he would prove a pliant ally to existing Russian powers. To counter the insidious influence of the French and the Austrians, the slothful British ambassador in St. Petersburg, Sir Robert Keith, must be roused from his passivity. Yet, Frederick's outlook remained bleak. He surmised that the new Tsar's accession would prove as fruitless to him as had the arrival of Charles III in Spain 3 years prior. Little did he know that fate would prove him wrong. As the French complained bitterly, the new Tsar had not a mere attachment, but an inexpressible passion for Frederick, whom he hailed in a personal letter one of the greatest heroes the world has ever seen.
Man, he really just became... He lucked out. Talk about fortune favoring Frederick, right? Literally a fanboy took control, a fanboy of his. And honestly, I don't blame him for being a fan of Frederick. Frederick has pulled off some great feats so far. And just his endurance and durability is amazing. In the face of just getting pummeled left and right? So yes, like, this is talk about the luckiest break of all time.
In fact, he often wore the uniform of a Prussian major general and displayed all portraits of his hero in his apartment. Ever resourceful, Frederick resorted to the most sycophantic flattery to win over Emperor Peter's active friendship. He dispatched the legendary Order of the Black Eagle to the pugnacious monarch. With great authority, he appointed him as the chef of the Berlin regiment of Seeburg, a position usually reserved for only the most exceptional of military leaders. In addition, he bestowed upon him a prestigious nominal rank of great magnitude in the Prussian army. Peter's fascination with Prussia was not just a mere admiration for Frederick's heroic deeds, but it was also fueled by his great need for Prussian assistance in regaining the Duchy of Schleswig from Denmark for the House of Holstein, to which he belonged. And it did not take long before a glimmer of hope shone upon Frederick. During a grand banquet at the Russian court on the 5th of February, Peter's discontent with his Austrian ally overflowed, and his harsh words about Austria were so untamed that the Austrian ambassador, Count Mercy, felt too intimidated to even utter them in his dispatch to Vienna. Subsequently,
yeah, and also, like, when we watch the old Britannia video, like, Russian and Austrian correspondence, even before Russia pulled out, was kind of almost, like, not really that strong either, almost non-existent. So, yeah. Just essentially the Austrian coalition just falls apart, huh?
Peter issued orders to the Russian generals to cease all hostile actions against Prussia. Furthermore, the Turks and Tartars were urged to attack Austria. On the 5th of May, a momentous treaty of alliance was signed between Prussia and Russia. Soon after, Russian diplomats were able to broker a peace treaty between Prussia and Sweden, which was signed on the 22nd of May. And in the weeks that followed, a tangible treaty of alliance between Russia and Prussia was finally concluded. Frederick's eyes widened in astonishment as he witnessed the swift transformation of events.
I'm telling you, this is divine intervention. God himself must have wanted this, because just a complete 180, right? Like, man, you couldn't write something this, like, that's amazing. I'm just happy to see Frederick catch a break. The poor guy. He's just been beaten down by life. Like, it's just nice that when you see a guy who suffers a lot finally catch a break, you know?
In a mere matter of weeks, the north and east were subdued, and the erstwhile enemy, Russia, had transformed into an ally. No wonder that his heart swelled with pride as he sat down to pen the chronicles of this extraordinary episode. The summary of events will present to our view Prussia on the brink of ruin at the end of the last campaign, past recovery in the judgment of all politicians. Yet one woman dies, and the nation revives. However, at this point, it must be noted that Frederick was perhaps giving this act of fate too much credit. Had he truly grasped the dire straits of his enemies, he might have tempered his jubilation. When word reached him that 20,000 men had been discharged from the Austrian army, he was quick to assume that it was a sign of Maria Theresa's unfaltering confidence in securing a total victory. But the reason behind the discharge of the soldiers was not due to a surplus of confidence, but rather a dearth of funds to pay them. So many taxes had been imposed and raised, and so many loans had been procured, that the coffers of Austria were left drained and empty. In truth, almost 40% of their annual revenue was now dedicated to servicing the immense debt they had incurred. The situation in France was no better, with a state bankruptcy becoming a very real possibility. When the French ambassador inquired about the fiscal structure of the Habsburg monarchy, the Austrian financial expert, Count Ludwig Zinzendorf, famously retorted, "Can one blind man show another the way?" Once the realization dawned upon Frederick of the great changes that had transpired in St. Petersburg, his demeanor was transformed into one of great exuberance. On the 6th of March, 1762, he inscribed, "The storm clouds are breaking up, and we can look forward to a beautiful calm day, shining with rays bursting from the sun. However, despite the favorable turn of events, there remained tasks at hand. The Russians were presently evacuating Pomerania, leaving Silesia and Saxony ripe for recapture. Schweidnitz was the utmost priority, for as long as the Austrians maintained control of Lower Silesia, they held a strong bargaining chip for the forthcoming peace negotiations. Leaving Prince Henry and 30,000 men to monitor Saxony, Frederick led an army ranging from 66,000 to 72,000 to Silesia. The strength of these armies was in their numbers alone, not in quality. Upon arrival, he encountered Daun and a massive army of 82,000 men entrenched in defensive positions around Schweidnitz. Nevertheless, the spirits of Frederick's army were lifted as 15,000 to 20,000 Russian troops under his former rival Chernyshev arrived to reinforce their ranks.
My goodness, man. I'm like happy for Frederick right now. The man went through a lot.
Their combined might was a force to be reckoned with, and together they pressed Daun and his army back to Burkersdorf, situated to the southwest of Schweidnitz. Undeterred, Frederick sought to drive Daun out by employing General Franz Karl Ludwig von Wied zu Neuwied and a corps of 20,000 men to incite chaos in the northeastern region of Bohemia. On the 9th of July, Wied made his way across the border at Friedland and dispatched Lieutenant General Reitzenstein with a horde of light cavalry in the direction of Königgrätz. But these cavaliers soon went rogue, causing Reitzenstein to report that the anarchy amongst the Cossacks is so rampant that any virtuous man would lose his honor and good reputation if associated with them. Daun remained still, biding his time. Yet the tides of war are fickle and capricious. On the 18th of July, word reached Frederick that the Russian army had been summoned back to their homeland. A palace coup in St. Petersburg had taken place, and the newly crowned Tsar, Peter III, had met a bloody end.
Oh yeah, Catherine. I completely forgot that Catherine removed her husband. I completely forgot that Catherine was cut right here during this time.
The recall of the Russian army had dealt a severe blow to Frederick's campaign. However, Frederick, ever the master of strategy, wasn't ready to concede defeat just yet. With a generous bribe, he convinced the Russian commander Chernyshev to delay his retreat for 3 days, even if he played no part in the upcoming conflict. This brief respite allowed Frederick to marshal his troops and prepare for a decisive attack on the heights of Leutmansdorf and Burkersdorf.
His Majesty must be pleased with the conduct of Count Frederick.
Daun had fortified every rise and hill, from Dittmannsdorf to Burkersdorf and Leutmansdorf, spanning the entire chain with his troops. These soldiers were reinforced by copious emplaced batteries, linked by trenches and abatis, making it an impenetrable fortress. Daun had reason to be proud of his work, for his careful and shrewd maneuvers had consistently outwitted the great Prussian king and his vaunted legions. His cunning strategies had prevented the Prussian army from capturing the vital stronghold of Schweidnitz for several precious weeks, all without a battle. Furthermore, the marshal was still able to feed his men and supplies into Schweidnitz, where he had a garrison of about 12,000 soldiers under the unyielding leadership of Franz von Guasco. The main Austrian positions lay behind substantial fieldworks on the southwest side of the valley, containing the villages of Dittmannsdorf and Ruissendorf. In total, Daun led between 30 and 45,000 troops. The Prussian king commanded approximately 40,000 troops. His audacious plan was to fix the enemy forces with a magnificent show of strength by the lingering Russian army and some Prussian units under the leadership of General Ramin and General Manteuffel. The Lossu hussars galloped through the field, their horses kicking up dust as they went. The red-coated Bosniaks, known for their unrelenting courage, added a touch of animation to the scene as they marched up and down. This was a ploy to fool Daun, making him think that this was where the main attack would be launched. Meanwhile, the main Prussian brigades were sent to the northeast and east, where the enemy positions were weakly guarded. The Prussian forces were divided into 3 separate columns.
Frederick does love his trickery, doesn't he? Going immediately, basically to flank. Telling you, man, oldest trick in the book, but still one of the most effective always.
Each commanded by a skilled and seasoned general. 3 nights before the battle, the king dispatched the first column under General Wied to circumvent Schweidnitz and reach their positions. The second column was commanded by General Mollendorf, following Wied. The third was commanded by General Knobloch, who was to attack the Austrian center at Weistritz. As the first light of dawn illuminated the valleys on July 19th, Frederick moved his headquarters to Bogendorf. The soldiers of Ramin's brigade stood at the far western flank in a 2-rank line of battle. In the right center of the Prussian army, the Jägers of the Manteuffel brigade awaited their orders. Manteuffel's artillery wing's howitzers opened fire, unleashing their fiery projectiles over the dense woods, some projectiles reaching the Austrian right wing in the rear. Amidst the stormy deluge, General Wied, leading the Prussian far left, marched relentlessly for 2 consecutive nights from the border hills. Undaunted by the treacherous weather, on the night of the 19th of July, he set forth on a 3rd grueling march, circumventing Schweidnitz, towards the foot of the Leutmannsdorf hills. These towering peaks, shrouded in dense woods and riddled with ravines, presented a formidable challenge to any who dared to approach. Together with Mollendorf, Wied marched forth, their path illuminated by the fiery blaze of Manteuffel's heavy artillery. Far behind them, the brigade of Knobloch marched straight from Bogendorf. As the morning of July 20th dawned, the Prussian forces stood resolute, their positions secured. The bulk of their army had descended from the northeast, poised to launch a fierce assault against the isolated right wing of their enemy. These numbered around 5,000, led by the indomitable Lieutenant General William O'Kelly. O'Kelly commanded his 2 battalions to hold the far eastern flank on the treacherous slopes of Leutmannsdorfer Berg. Despite the lack of cover and the slippery conditions brought on by the incessant rain, the Irishman stood steadfast. The remainder of his troops, totaling around 4,000 soldiers, stood ready to defend the ground above Burkersdorf, prepared to face the full might of the Prussian army. To their rear, the Prince de Ligne held a redoubt near Weistritz. At dusk on the 20th day of July, 4 battalions of the Mollendorf Brigade silently conquered the village of Burkersdorf. After a fierce encounter, they vanquished a band of Austrian grenadiers who had ensconced themselves in the nearby village. Then they erected a fortification close to it, concealing within it a formidable row of 55 artillery pieces. These weapons stood ready to decimate the Austrian positions farther up the valley. Once Wied began his advance, Mollendorf would unleash a thunderous barrage from the great battery at Burkersdorf, and then he would march onwards toward their enemies, his right flank steadfastly supported by Knobloch. As the first rays of the sun pierced the sky on July 21st, Frederick arrived at the position where Wied's brave troops stood ready for battle. the great king ordered his valiant soldiers to advance and begin the assault. But at this same moment, General Brentano Cimaroli and his corps made their way back to the Austrian camp after completing their Silesian expedition. Daun, the shrewd Austrian commander, immediately dispatched Brentano's corps to reinforce the heights at Leutmannsdorf, sensing the impending danger of the Prussian attack.
Dang. Yeah, again, Daun is... like, I like how Daun and Frederick are just, like, trying to outwit each other. They really are just great, like, rivals to each other, as they both kind of battle to see who at the end is, like, proves superior. And man, I've loved this rivalry. Daun and Frederick, like, I can watch these two go back and forth. It's like they really are playing chess with each other, you know?
The Prussian infantry launched a ferocious assault on the Austrian positions around Langenbeilau. But just as they were about to gain ground, General Brentano's leading battalions arrived, fortifying the position and repelling the Prussian charge with great force. The Prussians suffered a loss of 500 soldiers without achieving any progress. However, the Prussians found a way to turn the tides of the battle. They discovered
the flank! So... oh my goodness.
A ravine through which they could turn the Austrian entrenchments. 2 more Prussian battalions were sent to reinforce the assault, and with thundering roars and fierce determination, the Prussians drove the Austrians back. Another part of the Prussian army readied themselves for the next phase of their attack. Colonel Lottum led 2 regiments in a fearless charge towards the heights around Ober-Leutmannsdorf. The thunderous sound of cannons echoed through the valley as Lottum and his men relentlessly cleared the way. Despite the overwhelming odds, they pushed forward with unyielding courage, suffering over 300 casualties. With the left flank now in disarray, Brentano's army retreated to Wustwalterdorf under heavy artillery fire. Acknowledging the momentum, Frederick spurred his horse towards the west, where Mollendorf had opened the battle with a battery of 55 guns. The sound of battle intensified as the Prussian guns roared with a deadly ferocity, unleashing a hail of shells upon the Austrians. In the heat of battle, Mollendorf's infantry launched a daring attack, climbing a treacherous hill path to infiltrate the right flank of the Austrian positions. The air was thick with smoke and dust as the Prussian soldiers charged forward with their bayonets at the ready. Amidst the chaos, a fearless grenadier named Wolf emerged, igniting a blaze that engulfed the surrounding abatis.
Man, like, things are going so well for Frederick's plan right now. They're actually pushing through and seemingly gonna collapse right into the Austrians right here. Wow. And mainly because they've been able to find areas to outflank their enemy. Like, this area doesn't seem as secure as I think Daun may have presumed it to be.
Clearing the path for his fellow soldiers to continue their relentless assault. Thanks to Ramin, Manteuffel and the Russians, the Austrians were kept at bay at the northwest, preventing
Man, they really thought, like, dude, Frederick has outwitted Daun. Wow.
any reinforcements from reaching their heavily besieged lines. Despite their valiant efforts, O'Kelly knew his positions were untenable. The unrelenting storming from the Prussian army had caused the Austrians to abandon their positions and retreat, leaving behind a trail of devastation. As Mollendorf's advance guard installed their artillery at O'Kelly's previously held position, the Prince de Ligne's position was battered relentlessly. It forced Daun to order a general retreat, effectively conceding defeat to the Prussian army. Frederick had called off the intended attack of Knobloch's brigade, ascending the Weistritz Valley in person. Victory was theirs regardless. Though the Burkersdorf action was a relatively bloodless affair compared to other battles of the war, the cost of victory was still steep. The Prussian army suffered approximately 1,700 casualties, including 26 officers, and over 800 soldiers killed, and 900 wounded or missing. Wiede's corps alone lost 25 officers and 1,568 men. The Austrians were not spared either, with a total of 1,373 men lost in battle, including 202 killed, 349 wounded, 236 captured, and 559 missing. Other sources indicate at least 2,500 soldiers lost. Brentano's corps lost 13 cannons, 24 officers, and 873 soldiers. O'Kelly lost 476 men in the fray.
And, I guess two main victories that, Dawn had over Frederick in the beginning, and now Frederick has gotten two direct victories over Dawn. It's a real coming of, just seeing how far Frederick came and finally overcame his great rival Dawn. I consider them sort of rivals. I'm not sure if history sees it like that, but man, just amazing. Frederick has proven to be a master of maneuvering, positioning, and just that was amazing. Once again, Frederick, man, has overcome such great odds and defeated the Austrians. My subjects shall rejoice. For me, poor. This man's broken. Even then, even coming out of this war, I don't think he's gonna be alright. I think he's, forever scarred. Poor Freddy boy, man. It's just, he went through too much. Even then, the best he could hope for is just a remainder piece, but he seems like he's not gonna be okay for the rest of his life. Yeah, you can just see that all the sorrow and grief and depression, he's not leaving this war. He's leaving this war forever changed. He's not gonna be the same anymore. And that's kind of the tragic part of war, huh? Yeah.
After the legendary Battle of Burkersdorf, the Prussian army laid siege to the Austrian garrison in the mighty fortress of Schweidnitz. Daun withdrew from his positions, retreating to the hills of Glatz, effectively losing his communications with Schweidnitz. Frederick kept a watchful eye on the passes leading from the country of Glatz into Silesia, ensuring that Daun could not come to the relief of the besieged fortress. In one last attempt, Daun launched a fierce attack on the force commanded by the Duke of Bevern in a daring attempt to relieve Schweidnitz. Yet, the unyielding Prussian king quickly came to the aid of his army, sending a cavalry charge in support of Bevern's men. The Austrians were no match for the combined might of the Prussian forces and were soundly defeated. This was Daun's final attempt to break the Prussian grip on the fortress, as he was pushed back into the Bohemian mountains, cut off from Schweidnitz. Regarding Daun's inaction, the Swiss military officer and theorist Antoine-Henri Jomini wrote, "Modern history offers no comparable example of cowardice." For 63 grueling days, the Austrian garrison, led by the skilled General Guasco, defended the fortress with unwavering determination. Despite facing insurmountable odds, the courageous defenders held their ground against the relentless Prussian assault. It was only after a fortunate bomb thrown by the Prussian army blew up a magazine, opening the way for a final assault, that the garrison ultimately surrendered on the 9th of October. The Battle of Burkersdorf and the Siege of Schweidnitz marked a turning point in the brutal conflict, returning Silesia to Prussian control. In the west, the French garrison at Cassel also capitulated on the 1st of November, ending the campaign there. But the war still raged on in Saxony, where Prince Henry continued to campaign with unwavering energy. As the war drew to a close, there remained one final colossal battle to bring the conflict to a resounding conclusion.
One more to go. One more to go, guys. Ugh. Yeah.
The King of England wants to win. The King of Prussia does not want to lose, because if he doesn't lose, he will have won everything. The echoes of the Battle of Burkersdorf reverberated across the Austrians' broken spirits. Their once great coalition was now splintering, leaving them to face their enemies alone. As Great Britain and France began negotiations for peace, a prelude to the end of hostilities, Russia's new Tsarina, Catherine, was unwilling to launch another attack against Frederick. The coffers of her nation lay empty, bereft of funds to finance another war. The once mighty Austria was on the brink of standing alone. Though the Prussian situation in Silesia seemed somewhat hopeful, the front in Saxony was still dangerously unpredictable. With this in mind, King Frederick called upon his enterprising brother, Prince Henry, to defend the region with an army of 30,000 troops. At the onset of the 1762 campaign, an Austrian corps, led by the renowned General Macquarie, occupied an entrenched camp near Freiburg, but on May 12th, Prince Henry and his troops launched a surprise attack on the chain of posts screening the Austrians' positions, emerging victorious. The Austrians were forced to abandon their entrenched camp, and on May 14th, the Prussians claimed their place in the very same Austrian camp near Freiburg. Then, Serbelloni was replaced as commander-in-chief of the Austrian forces in Saxony. General Hadicke took up the mantle on September 7th. He soon hatched a daring plan to drive the Prussian troops out of the region, threatening their precious bakery in Freiburg. On September 27th, the Austrian and Imperial Corps launched a series of complex maneuvers aimed at dislodging Prince Henry from his entrenched positions at Freiburg. Despite all his efforts, Prince Henry found himself powerless in the face of the overpowering forces arrayed against him. Finally, in the dark of night, on October 15th, Prince Henry ordered his army to retreat northwestward in 2 columns, towards General Hulsen and his reserves stationed at Kleinvoitsberg. This retreat was a strategic necessity, for the forces arrayed against him were simply too great to resist. Even as Prince Henry retreated, news arrived that Frederick was sending a reinforcement of 20 battalions and 55 squadrons from Silesia. With this knowledge, Prince Henry resolved to maintain communication with Hulsen and remained in his camp until October 22nd, gathering his strength and preparing for the next stage of the battle. As the days passed, Prince Henry remained at his camp to Freiburg's north, as he edged closer to General Hulsen's positions. But even as he prepared for battle, he received a crucial piece of intelligence. The army was expecting reinforcements of their own. It could very well be Hadicke's main army, encamped near Dresden. Fearing that his window of opportunity was closing, Prince Henry made the bold decision to attack the isolated 30,000-strong Austrian army and Reichsarmee contingent before these additional troops arrived.
Dang, man. Already Henry was going because of the strength of the enemy. Now he just has to give them a battle. This is bold and beyond risky, but so far Henry's kind of been an underrated aspect of this war. And he's kind of been doing pretty well on his own, so I'm actually really looking forward to seeing more of him and what he can do on the fly. I did not think we were going to end with him in terms of the battle aspect of this series, but alright, show me what you've got, Henry.
Prince Henry, commanding a force of approximately 28,000 men, was facing an opposing force of 30,000 under the leadership of the Prince of Stolberg.
Not too bad odds.
Despite the disadvantage in numbers, he spent a week meticulously preparing for the impending battle. As the evening of October 28th descended, he gathered his subordinate officers to explain his plan of attack. The Prussian reconnaissances had revealed that the Austro-Imperial left was vulnerable, lacking any solid position to anchor their defenses. Sensing an opportunity, Prince Henry decided to launch a daring assault on the extreme left of the enemy army at Brand and Berthelsdorf. At the same time, another part of his army would engage the Austro-Imperial forces head-on, fixing them in place and preventing them from reinforcing their left flank. The left wing of the Austro-Imperial army was formed by the corps of General Beck, with its front facing the villages of Brand and Berthelsdorf. This wing was protected by several redoubts and batteries. In the center, the Austro-Imperial army was positioned with entrenchments and batteries covering the roads and the plain below. The reserve was placed behind the center, ready to intervene wherever needed. The whole position was further strengthened by a network of trenches, abattis, and other field fortifications. Meanwhile, news had reached General Hulsen of Henry's plan. He marshaled his formidable force of 10,500 men and advanced towards their positions, crossing the Mulde River and intending to attack the Austrians and Reichsarmee in their rear. The critical gap between Hadik's army far to the east and the Imperialists of Stolberg was bridged by General Butler. Butler was a seasoned commander of 8,000 soldiers, including an elite corps of 24 squadrons of Allied cavalry and 34 pieces of artillery. They set up camp around Dittmannsdorf on the other side of the Mulde River. As for Stolberg, his main imperial army maintained their steadfast position northeast of Freiburg, extending all the way down into the city. There can be little doubt that Stolberg felt an overwhelming sense of caution, realizing that the positions held by his men could likely only withstand a frontal assault. The Prussians divided their forces into 4 separate bodies. The renowned Seydlitz led the largest column, numbering over 9,000 soldiers. He was charged with sweeping around the Spittelwald to strike at Stolberg, who was holed up in the heart of Freiburg. This daring maneuver would see Seydlitz launch a direct assault against the enemy's left flank. A battalion under General Kleist supported him. Meanwhile, General Otto Stutterheim led the second column of 3,600 men through the thick forest, while his brother, General Johann Stutterheim, commanded the third column of approximately 4,400 troops and launched a diversionary attack against the eastern end of the enemy's works, aiming to create confusion and disarray in the enemy ranks. The reserves, consisting of the 4K'd infantry, remained behind Schirmer. Otto Stutterheim's men were the first to engage in combat. They charged forward, relentlessly pushing against the enemy vanguard in a crowded space in front of Klein-Woltersdorf. The Prussian artillery was quickly set up and positioned once this patch of ground was seized from the enemy, allowing for a devastating barrage to be launched against the opposition. Meanwhile, Johann Stutterheim's column marched forward to strike at the Spittelwald and the imperialist positions in and around Freiburg. However, upon reaching the woods, Johann Stutterheim's troops were met with unexpected resistance from a fierce enemy contingent led by Lieutenant General Anton Friedrich Roth, including the formidable Baden-Baden infantry.
Dang.
Despite the initial resistance, the Prussians persisted in their attack. Stutterheim called for reinforcements and his men continued to fight against the enemy, relentlessly pushing them back from their fortified positions. The enemy sought refuge behind the lines of abattis, but the Prussian advance was unrelenting. The situation became even more dire when other units, along with Prince Stolberg himself, arrived to reinforce the ranks. Sword in hand, Prince Stolberg valiantly fought against the Prussian onslaught, determined to prevent them from making any further gains. After a grueling and hard-fought battle, The Prussian advance was finally halted, and they were ultimately forced to withdraw from their forward position. The Prussian strategy was a calculated and complex one, with the attacks of the Stutterheim brothers all serving as mere diversions to keep the enemy occupied. Meanwhile, the main attack force under Seydlitz and Kleist, accompanied by Prince Henry himself, was stealthily proceeding with its mission. Seydlitz.
Heck yeah, we love to see this. Like I said, this operation is very complex and multi-layered, but at least the diversionary aspect of it was kind of being held out here, as Henry is now going full stealth mode, and seemingly he might even get the drop on the Austrians here.
His column moved in a wide arc to engage the enemy in the area directly opposite to where they arrived. Seydlitz's men marched towards Kleinschirmer. However, they soon encountered a formidable wall of imperialist resistance, threatening to halt their advance before it had even begun. It was then that General Kleist, leading a small force, launched a ferocious attack against the soldiers stationed at Kleinschirmer. With swords clashing and battle cries echoing throughout the valley, Kleist's men pushed the enemy back and cleared the way for Seydlitz to proceed.
Dang. Good on you, Kleist,
From a vantage
man.
point of the woods, Major Seeger caught sight of the Prussian main attack force moving towards the hamlets of St. Michael's and Linde. Without a moment's hesitation, Seeger rallied the troops he could gather and took up position at the edge of the woods, ready to face the approaching enemy. As Seydlitz's forces moved forward, they came upon a vast expanse of open country near Brand, where they faced off against General Mayer's imposing army. The Prussians refused to be intimidated and devised a daring plan to outmaneuver their opponents. They sent a small yet intrepid detachment to contain Mayer's forces, while the rest of the main attack force bypassed them and launched a full-scale assault on the enemy's stronghold. As the Prussian column marched forward, they were met with fierce resistance from Seeger and his men. The clash was intense, with imperialist cavalry charging headlong into the Prussian cavalry escort. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Seeger and his compatriots held their ground, determined to halt the enemy advance. For a brief moment, it seemed as though Seeger might succeed in derailing the entire Prussian plan of action. The tide of battle was turning as Major General Vecchi appeared.
I have to say, I have to give it to the Austrians for putting up a resistance. I don't know if it's gonna be enough though, but they are putting up quite the fight. You have to give it to them, at least in that aspect.
With 2 Hussar units, the 34th Hussars of Dessewiffi and those of Baranier. Without delay, they charged forward in a counterattack, aimed at pushing back the Prussian forces surging forth from the confines of the Spittelwald. The Prussians, taken aback by this sudden onslaught, were forced to halt their advance. In a matter of moments, they were driven off the Galgenberg by the ferocity of Vecchi's men. It seemed as though Prince Henry was about to suffer a crushing defeat, but the fighting soon stabilized, at least for the moment, in that area. In the meantime, to the south, the battle around St. Michaelis and Brand had swung in favor of the Prussians in a resolute manner. Kleist and Seydlitz had spearheaded the assault, surging right towards the town of Freiburg. Stolberg could have defended Freiburg with a tenacious resistance by obliterating part of the town, which would have made it extremely difficult for the Prussians to penetrate. However, instead of taking that uncompromising stance, he executed a fighting withdrawal from Freiburg. Stolberg's quick thinking spared the town from suffering any significant damage during the battle. Meanwhile, the Stutterheim brothers continued to make significant strides in the battle. By 10:30 a.m.
Yeah, it seems like the Austrians are being pushed on, being pushed, but their resistance is actually kind of beyond commendable. The fact that they're managing to push back and even check the advances of the Prussians, like I said, very admirable.
Their forces had renewed their advance and pushed the remaining enemy troops out of Klein-Waltersdorf. The 7th Infantry of Bevan, under Otto's command, charged ahead with great ferocity, forcing the enemy to retreat from their mountain stronghold. The Prussians managed to capture 5 cannon and a flag, surrounding the enemy from the south in the process. Schmettau's 4th Cavalry was equally relentless, charging through 2 regiments at the Spittelwald, capturing 10 guns and 8 flags with impressive might. At around the same time, Johann Stutterheim charged forward with his task force towards Freiburg, adding more momentum to the already favourable situation for the Prussians. By 11 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, it seems like the Prussians are just breaking through now, and that the Austrians seem like they can just kind of be, like, straight up, like, devoured.
The tide of the battle had irrefutably turned to the advantage of the Prussian forces. Even the 33rd Infantry of Esterhazy, sent by Butler to support Stolberg, could not stem the onslaught of the Prussian forces closing in from the west and the south. With the enemy forces rapidly approaching and the outlook increasingly bleak, Stolberg began contemplating retreat towards Frauenstadt. Shortly before 1 p.m., he initiated his retreat, which was aided by the cannons, to inflict as much damage as possible on the enemy while providing cover for the imperialist forces as they withdrew. Though the Prussian commanders did not pursue, the retreat was a critical moment in the Battle of Freiburg. The situation around Freiburg was dire, with no support troops to come to the Austrians' aid. The Prussian forces advanced. Meanwhile, General Hulsen led his forces to the Mulde, trying to reach the rear of Stolberg's forces. However, the retreat was well underway, and Butler's troops were stationed nearby at Dittmannsdorf, preventing Hulsen from safely launching an assault. The price of victory was high, with the Prussian...
Man, that was it, the final battle of the series. You have to give... I'm impressed by Henry. Like I said, Henry I feel like has kind of been like a bit of an unsung hero so far in this series. Like, you know, mainly not, we obviously haven't really been focusing too much on him, but like, he's done incredibly well. Like, man, he really lived up to the Call of Duty, you know? And he took this daring attack, you know, and managed to just pull off one last victory for Prussia. So again, it's fitting that Prussia should have this final victory, you know, to wrap up the series.
Forces sustaining approximately 1,400 casualties in the bloody engagement, while their Austrian adversaries suffered far greater losses, with roughly 2,700 killed or wounded, and a staggering 4,390 men and 79 officers captured, along with 28 guns and 11 battle flags. As the battered and defeated Allied forces retreated slowly upon Dippoldiswalde, the grim realization of their impending defeat began to dawn upon them. The forces of General Hulsen had missed the battle entirely.
Yesterday I was 60, today I'm 18 again. Heck yeah.
The resounding victory at Freiburg, located southwest of Dresden, proved to be the final blow to the already fragile Austrian position. The final movements on this front were quick and decisive. By the time Weid's forces arrived in Saxony, the Battle of Freiburg had already been won by the Prussians. Even the most stubborn hawks in Vienna had to concede that defeat was inevitable. The brunt of the fighting had fallen on Saxony, which had been all but destroyed. It was fitting, therefore, that a Saxon, Karl Thomas von Fritsch, was chosen to deliver the message to Frederick that Austria was prepared to negotiate. On the 25th of November, at the town of Meissen, the two sides finally came together to discuss the terms of peace. The grand negotiations commenced on the 30th of December 1762, within the esteemed halls of the Saxon Palace of Hubertusburg, just a short distance from Leipzig. The Austrians found themselves in a position of weakness, with their negotiating power severely hampered. Prior to receiving the news of the Prussian triumph at Freiburg, Daun had already forewarned Maria Theresa of the dire predicament they faced, stating, "If there is no hope of peace, then I cannot see how your majesty can continue the war, as the current situation is such that it is to be feared that the army cannot be kept in one piece throughout the winter." The absence of crucial supplies meant that the soldiers were scattered far and wide. The once mighty officer corps was now reduced to a state of total demoralization. In 1760, Kaunitz had warned against a peace that left all of Silesia in Prussian hands, and yet despite his fervent hopes, that was exactly what he received. Not even the fortress of Glatz, which had been held by Austria since July of 1760, could be maintained, but the delay in signing the treaty on the 15th of February 1763 was not due to Austrian stubbornness, but rather to Frederick's shrewd tactics. He cunningly prolonged the negotiations in order to extract every last ounce of Saxon resources, be it men, money, or supplies, and even women were not spared, as large numbers were carried off to Prussia in order to aid in the repopulation of the war-torn regions. The Peace of Hubertusburg
Wow. Okay, shrewd. Love to see that shrewdness back on display, Frederick. And again, Silesia, a main cause of to why this all happened. What Austria wanted the most, what they formed the coalition for, what they spent years and resources bankrupting themselves for. They didn't get crap. Austria, their luck, man. Their lack of luck is amazing. But Frederick held it, but he is forever scarred. I think he ain't gonna be the same ever again. But at least he can take comfort in knowing that he won and that he did it, and that the objective was survive, and he did just that.
Consisted of 21 articles, but one in particular stood out as the most significant. Article 12 confirmed the treaties of Breslau, Berlin, and Dresden from 1742 and 1745, which marked the conclusion of the first two Silesian wars. Essentially, peace had been achieved by returning to the way things were before the war. While it may have seemed like 6.5 years of fighting,
yeah, imagine going through all that and just being like, nothing changed, at least in terms of the borders, like, man, I'd be angry, I'd be like, oh crap. You know.
Been for nothing, the more insightful among the contemporaries understood the importance of the outcome. Among them was Count Johann Hartwig Ernst von Bernstorff, the Danish chief minister, who had kept his country out of the war, stating all Frederick had to do was not to lose in order to win everything. Had Count Johann Hartwig Ernst von Bernstorff's analysis reached Frederick's ears, he may have found himself nodding in agreement. He understood the immense stakes of the conflict and how perilously close his gambit had come to total failure. His mind was not set on aggression. He confided in Prince Henry that his next course of action would be to pay off his state's debts, and after that, I shall be able to die if I feel like it. Though Frederick believed that Maria Theresa and Kaunitz had grown weary of war and desired amicable relations, he remained ever vigilant, never forgetting the fable of the cat and the mice. Truly, the 7 Years' War had been a struggle of existential proportions, centered upon the quest for great power status. As Leopold von Ranke, the renowned German historian and progenitor of modern source-based history, said, "If one were to define a great power as one that can maintain itself against all comers, even when they are united, then Frederick had elevated Prussia to that lofty position."
Rightfully so. Prussia earned its state as a great power, man. Like, you can't tell me that this man did not survive this coalition, this gambit. Like, he held on and he endured until the very end. Amazing. I just need a... I'm applauding Frederick, because that was just amazing. He really is great. Like, he lives up to that name completely.
For the first time since the era of the Saxon emperors and Henry the Lion, a self-sufficient power emerged in northern Germany, requiring no alliance, relying solely on its own strength.
Leaving behind a legacy of military victory. Wow. The 19th century Prussia, yeah, and thanks to that, Prussia became part of the German Empire and became the biggest menace of the 20th century that the whole world needed to unite to fight. Yeah, I like that. I have relatives in Germany, by the way, you know, German cousins, so like, I don't know, it's always cool to see kind of German history and whatnot, you know?
Thank you very much for watching this video. Please leave a like, it really helps out the channel.
Man.
If there is a topic, battle, or person you would like to know, all my patrons...
That was a complete pleasure. That was amazing, man. And I'm very happy to have watched that series. I speedran this. I did my own forced march, or rather my own forced watch of this series. In 2 days, I've watched this series. And, this was a pleasure, I think. Finally knowing, I knew about Frederick the Great. I never looked at any of his battles personally. I never did much research on him other than knowing he was a renowned commander that even the likes of Napoleon admired. And it's nice to finally see that. You know, he wasn't flawless in a sense, like, you know, just constantly winning wars back to back like Napoleon. Or like flawless like almost Caesar was, or Alexander, but he, despite even taking L's and making mistakes along the way, his ability to endure, to rebound from any setback, and just to outlast his enemies, second to none. I think he earned the title the Great, and I hope he got to live somewhat more peacefully. I know he'll probably be forever scarred after what he went through, but I hope that he had at least a more peaceful end, and like rest finally, you know? As much as you can after enduring so much. And yeah, again, this was a pleasure, guys, and I enjoyed every minute of it.